The Guardian columnist Polly Toynbee and Conservative MP Henry Smith. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Polly, let's start with you. Do you welcome this cap?
No, it's an absolute disaster because it includes housing benefit in it. I mean, it sounds fine, 26,000, that sounds a very reasonable amount for people to live on, average wage. It's fine if you're in a council house and you're paying low rent, it's no problem at all. But the people who are really hit hard by this are living often in quite squalid private housing with sky-high rents. Rents have soared up way above inflation, and they're the ones who are really hit hard. And so you need to take housing benefit out of that, deal with it separately. Fine to have a cap for everything else so that it's the same if you live in Newcastle or in London. Some places rents are very cheap and it won't affect them at all. But it does mean, according to another report today, that in the southeast, nobody on middle to low income can afford to rent privately in the southeast.
OK, let's get Henry Smith's reaction to that. I mean, is your government right to bring in this cap? Why?
Well, I think it is. And I think any working people who are earning the average wage of 26,000 a year or less will be astounded that people up until now on benefits have been able to receive more than that. In terms of the affordability in London, as an example, this has been rolled out as a pilot in several London boroughs and has worked very well.
Four boroughs. No, Haringey having a very tough time putting this into practice, they say.
Well, Haringey is a Labour-controlled council. You'd expect them to say that.
Would you?
But actually, yeah, I think most people would think it is astounding that people should be earning more on benefits than the average earnings.
And that's the big point, isn't it, Polly Toynbee? Do you believe that with that principle that you shouldn't?
Principle.
So
Absolutely,
the principle's right.
It sounds fine until you look at the facts. This has all been glossed over, and Ian Duncan Smith keeps using phony facts. This is money going straight into the hands of often quite bad landlords in places like Haringey and Enfield, which are not posh areas. You know, we're not talking Kensington and Chelsea here, or the outskirts of London or other areas in the southeast where people are often squashed into pretty bad accommodation.
He says the homeless numbers haven't changed, though.
Rents.
He says that no one has been made homeless because of this.
That's not true at all. Homelessness has gone up by 23% nationally in the last 2 years, and it's gone up, and street homelessness has gone up by 62% in London alone in the last year. No, this is everybody knows there's a real housing crisis, whether it's for young people starting out in life, young families. It's a desperate situation.
Henry Smith, maybe you should have tackled affordable housing first before putting this benefits cap in place.
Well, house building was the lowest since the 1920s under the previous government, and now house building is starting to increase. Certainly in my constituency, there are hundreds of them.
I agree, the last government was a disaster, but it's actually worse under this government even than it was under the last.
Well, in my constituency, we've got hundreds of new houses being built, and I see people who come to my advice surgeries every week struggling on low incomes who are paying taxes, who think it is appalling that people should be getting more than £26,000 in benefits, and that's why an end needs to be brought to that. And it's all very well Polly saying that this is dreadful. I mean, I see real constituents coming through my doors. This isn't the view from, forgive me, but your villa in Tuscany.
I don't have a villa in Tuscany, thank you very much. Where have you been reading Guido Fawkes or something?
Well,
it's a lie. Will you take it back? I don't have one.
If you don't, I'd take it back,
Thank
of course.
You.
But
and it was a very snide and unpleasant thing to say. I'm not going to talk about your income or how much you're earning or any of that. Let's get to the fact. I see a great many people, because I go around and do a lot of interviews. I've been sitting in on citizens' advice bureaus, watching the level of distress, mostly due to the housing crisis. That's what underlies all this. Benefit levels, OK, that's one thing.
And you do know what you're talking about, because I know that you did a very good television programme where you lived on benefits for a while, or the amount that you'd be given on benefits.
I lived on the minimum wage.
Yes, minimum wage, and you found it very tough, didn't you? But just answer this tweet from Lynn Lawson, if you don't mind, Polly. She says, I work full-time, I don't get that in a week, i.e. the benefits cap. Maybe I should quit work, sit on my backside all day and enjoy life on the taxpayers' money. I mean, a lot of people feel hard done by in this country.
I understand that.
So what do you say to them? What do you say to Lynn?
I think it's quite understandable that if people don't realise that nearly all of this money is going to landlords, usually in places that are pretty unpleasant. They're not going to luxury living. if you've got a job and you've managed to get housing, or if you've got social housing, or if you're in...
Or maybe move. What's wrong with people moving for jobs?
They are moving and they're having to move. Well, you're not moving to jobs, you're moving to places with no jobs. You're moving to places like Middlesbrough and Hull, because that's where the cheap housing is, where there aren't jobs. So these people will never get jobs if they move from the southeast.
And Henry Smith, how do you feel personally about forcing families away from their communities in order to get cheaper homes and jobs?
Well, it's interesting because I had a constituent earlier on today who is on minimum wage saying, why isn't the benefit cap set at minimum wage? Why is it set at average earning levels of £26,000? People who are working, who are on limited incomes, have to make these choices every single day as to where they live and what sort of houses they live in. People are making those choices every single day. If they can't afford a certain amount of mortgage or a certain amount of rent in the private sector, then they move.
Can I ask you something? A new report came out today from the Resolution Foundation saying people in work we're talking about, not benefits, that nobody earning, say, $22,000 with a child can afford any longer to find anywhere in the southeast a two-bedroom, humble, basic, modest, for an affordable rent for within 35% of their earnings. Isn't that impossible?
Well, that's the same for people who are working,
yes,
and are paying the average, getting paid the average earnings. We need to get our welfare bill into check. It was under the previous government £95 billion a year,
and you'll save 100 million
pensions,
a year, which isn't much,
pensions. Is it? It's a saving is important in difficult financial times. And it's also, I think, an important principle that people shouldn't be earning more on benefits than they can do.
Just to wrap up, could you live on £500 a week? Paulie Toynbee?
Well, it depends how big my family is and where you find to live, because nearly all that money will go on rent. If you're living and working, you've got a job and kids in school in London,
Smith,
anywhere.
You live in leafy Crawley in Sussex. Could you live on £500 a week?
Living on £500 a week would be a big struggle, and I would have to downsize my house if I was living on £500 a week. But that is the sort of choice that people who are in work have to make every single day.
Paulie Toynbee and Henry Smith, thank you very much for your thoughts tonight.